Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Happy to be here with a live video interview with the one and only James Fox, UFO filmmaker extraordinaire. James, welcome.
Thank you for having me on. I was just trying to remember the last time. I think I was on a mountain peak somewhere.
You were like on one of the mountains of Mars, I thought.
A crater on the moon.
Signal with you. That was
yeah. Wasn't that before COVID hit and I was going to be released in theaters and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, that was before the world turned upside down. I remember those days.
Oh, the good old days. We were sitting in bars, rubbing shoulders, drinking tequila, you know.
My God, don't make me sad thinking about the olden times.
We didn't know how good we had it.
We did that interview, though. I remember thinking, so your film is almost done. By the way, for everyone listening, James's film is called The Phenomenon. We're about to show a trailer any moment for it. But I remembered thinking, okay, so we're going to do this film. It's going to be released in the fall, even though we were talking about it like many months early. I thought, well, that's fine. But then I got you. You were like on the most weird cell connection out in the middle of nowhere. And this is much better. I just want to say thank you for we're having a nice, good audio quality. I can see you. People are happy.
And you can see Paul David's artwork in the background, who did Roswell.
Yeah, Paul is wonderful, by the way. He's another great filmmaker. And if you see him, give him my best, please. I'm a big fan of Paul David's. So this is a film called The Phenomenon. And I mean, we're in an era where there's a lot of UFO documentaries and films that come out, but you've always been able to separate yourself from the pack. I've always felt you did, a number of really excellent films in the past. In fact, the very first time I ever did a video on anything was for Out of the Blue, which you did, feels like a million years ago. I remember sitting down for 3 hours, and I think we got like a minute out of that for me. I was so just nervous, and I think I had to do that without my glasses too, which was really weird. So, different era.
I remember there was all this shuffling of plants and stuff. It was in a hotel room with Tim Coleman.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yeah, Tim was wonderful. He was like, "Richard, that was really great, but let's try it again." And I was like, "Okay, let's do it again."
Try to give a little more pizzazz this time.
Yeah, totally.
Give a little more pizzazz on the 10th time.
My God, I'll never forget that. So I want people to know about your film. The Phenomenon is, I just saw it for the second time now today, and I'm really glad that I was able to get a screener of it to check it out. It's been released for a couple of days. You're going to get to talk all about it. But you know what? How about we just show the trailer right now so people can kind of see what it's all about. And I think I've got this set up for proper viewing, and I've set up for audio to work. So how about we give it a shot, James? I'm going to get us out of the picture here. Here we go. The Phenomenon trailer. Everyone, enjoy. Can we hear this?
No, I can't.
All right, hold on. Wait. We're going to back up. I'm going to do this over. Oh, man. I was just given a...
The audio is 60% of the video.
We're going to get this to happen here in just a second. You know, I did a test of this earlier.
While you guys are talking about this, speaking of audio,
yeah,
I would like to say to your audience, if I may,
please,
because we are going to be in theaters, I had a number of people in the industry sort of bend my ear and say, you know, you really should hire a sound engineer and do a proper 5.1 Dolby surround mix, which is a rather expensive thing. And it's not just like doing the actual mix itself, but he actually combs through the entire film, every channel, puts filters, gets the levels just right, cleans up bits that are like old, you know, from archival stuff. And he spent probably 8 weeks on it. And then he did a 5.1 surround mix. And I tell you, I felt like I was watching the film for the first time. So if anyone out there has a Dolby surround, you know, mix at their home or theater at their home, or just good speakers, please, I implore you to use them.
All right, James, I have this now, and we're gonna share this trailer with audio. I think we got it this time. Here we go.
I knew this was
Please say we can
news
hear
from the
this.
front
I
page
can't
of the
hear a
New York
thing.
Times.
My gosh. Look at that thing.
We need to accept that
Can we hear this?
are not alone
I can.
in the
Okay, good.
universe.
The federal government, all these years, has covered up everything. It's very, very bad for our country.
There had been visitation, crashed craft, material recovered.
It was not anything from this earth. All I could do is keep a mouth shut.
The public has a right to know.
There's a tremendous resistance.
I guarantee every one of them knows that this event happened.
Hiding these dark secrets even from elected presidents.
They came running up here in such a panic. Child can't make it up.
Declassified government documents confirm ongoing UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites.
Are you saying there's some evidence that still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
These things are real. They're here. This is happening now.
And there we have it. Shazam. We got it.
I gotta watch that.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right?
I gotta watch that. Do you know that I have not watched the film since it was completed?
There's a good reason.
Let me get this out here. I'm going to unshare. Well, that's what happens. You know, when I think when someone finishes a big project, like when I write a book or whatever, how many times do I really want to reread it or listen to an old interview? So I'm sure it's just got to be the same with you. You make this amazing thing and then it's like, are you just done with it and you just want to move on to the next project?
You just push it out. Well, no, I am absolutely not ready for the next project just yet.
No, you're like still lying on the field in victory, probably. Just like, yes, got it done.
Honestly, I feel I've never quite experienced the feeling that I'm having right now. It's excitement coupled with fatigue, and you know, it was a hard push.
Well, you're doing very well. Just before we started, you were telling me about how how it's moving. I mean, it's been released for 2 days now, and I think you were saying it's number 24 worldwide.
So let's see, it's all films number 24 worldwide, and it's bigger on Amazon and iTunes. But it's number 1 for documentaries, number 24 for all films. But yesterday it was number 38 for all films. So it's jumped its way up the charts to 24. So I'm hoping tomorrow it'll be maybe 14.
That's what we want. Hey, listen, seriously, congratulations on a job. Very well done. Let's talk about this documentary. It moves through some very interesting phases, I thought. And I would really love for you just to talk about how you decided to put it all together. There's the first half, maybe even a little bit more, is a historical treatment that has the ability to be fresh, even for people who've been doing this subject for a long time. And I can just speak personally. And I think the reason for that is that you found a lot of really original video interviews for people that I think viewers will be really shocked to see a lot of these voices from the 1950s and 60s come to life. Can you talk a little bit about how you put all of this together and then maybe move ahead and just give a vision for the total, for the full documentary and your vision for this?
Well, I don't think I'm ever going to cover history again, because I've done it now for out of the blue. I know what I saw. I did some of it in 50 Years of Denial. That was a Discovery Channel piece. And I did it here because I know I probably sound like a broken record, but I've been trying to create the seminal feature-length documentary that could burst through into the mainstream. I think I got close in the past, and my justification was, okay, I've got to cover historical stuff because it's relevant to what's happening today. And if I do succeed in breaking through, transcending the UFO community, which I'm a part of, but they're not going to have any more information on the phenomenon other than Area 51 and Roswell.
Exactly.
So, you know, I have to build my case for the likelihood of, for instance, the landing at the end in Rua, or the interaction with Commander Fravor, with that dramatic encounter off the coast of San Diego back in 2004. Well, we bookend the film. We start off at the beginning. Well, we give a little bit of hint of the New York Times stuff, but then we bookend with a dramatic encounter with Colonel William Coleman, who was a pilot, a World War II pilot. He was a colonel in the Air Force. He was also a public spokesman for Project Blue Book, I think in the mid to late 60s. Anyway, you listen to his dramatic encounter, which is a duration of about 9 minutes, that starts off at an elevation of about 9,000 feet, and it ends up at what he described as max continuous power at treetop level. And I said, what do you mean by maximum continuous power? And he said, if I went any faster, I'd blow the engines up. And he said he got within where he thought he was going to collide with this flying saucer at treetop level. He had to take evasive action. Yeah. And if he turned the plane to the right, the plane the wings would dig into the treetop. So he had to pull up first, and he lost sight of it briefly. And then he made the turn, evasive maneuver, to avoid colliding with this disc. And he said, just like Fravor, you blink your eye, and it's just flight characteristics, the no portholes for exhaust vents, the ability to slow down to the sight and blink of an eye, no air disturbance, no noise whatsoever, no visible, no wings, no tail. So, and then, all these years later, you're hearing Fravor talk about it, and you're like, okay, well, if the average Joe would watch the film and I didn't have that earlier stuff, they'd say, well, clearly it's some sort of, secret skunks work program, and that's what it is. But when you hear the same accounts in the 40s and 50s, that kind of changes the whole narrative, right?
Absolutely. In fact, it's really important that you did that, because you brought that case back to life. I think that was 1950, 51, something like that. I think it was a very early 1950s.
1955, and a B-25 bomber.
Okay, a little later.
People from Boeing, Lockheed Martin. Yeah. Of course, Colonel Coleman was at the controls.
But it's still very early, and
exactly.
You did a nice graphical recreation of the disc itself. It didn't look like a Tic Tac, but it's a classic flying saucer, really nicely done. And the interview with Coleman, I don't know when that was done. That could not have been quite recently. He can't be alive at this point.
No. In fact, when we were just assembling the team, of course, I've gone through a number of producers since then and partners. But when we were initially assembling the team, when it was back then referred to as 701, we hadn't even gotten any contract signed. We were just sort of in the very early stages of negotiations. And I kept saying, Colonel Coleman, we got to go get Colonel Coleman, Bob Friend, Colonel Coleman. Oh, just cool your jets, James. We're going to we're going to formulate a plan and get the funding all right. I said, no, you don't understand. We got to go get Colonel Coleman.
Yeah.
So I went off in 2013 and interviewed him, late 2013.
Oh, okay. Well, he was quite old when you got him, but he gave a great interview. And when you listen to this man, and I really encourage people to go check out your film, but you get to hear him, had to be in his 80s by then, but very lucid, very sharp, talking about this incredible encounter that you could tell even all of these years later. He hadn't really, I don't think he'd really figured it out. It just kind of blew his mind. You could just see.
Well, what he said to me was, and I'd say, well, what was it you saw? He goes, I don't know. He goes, I couldn't take it out in the tarmac and kick the tires. I said, kick the tires? What do you mean kick the tires? He's like, well, we have an old expression in the Air Force. You got to kick the tires. You got to walk around and kick the tires. And he's like, I couldn't kick the tires. I have no idea what I saw. I said, well, do you think what you saw was something that was from the Air Force? No. Do you think it was that? No. Well, what do you think? I don't know. He was very adamant about it. He wouldn't say. I said, I think the furthest he went is it might have been from somewhere else. Yeah.
All of the witnesses that you were able to incorporate into this film, including Coleman, including Fravor, including everybody else, pretty much all of them described the objects that they encountered as zipping off at the speed of a bullet.
Yeah.
Just absolutely out of the boundaries of anything that we know. So I just thought it was great that you set the stage historically to show, just as you said, the Tic Tac UFO is not the first of these. In fact, it's part of a long, long history of these inexplicable encounters. And it isn't realistic, is it, to just say, oh yeah, Skunkworks did that, or some black budget project. We're way beyond that, it seems. And the historical review as what you've done, I think shows that very well. So it's good that you did that.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll say one thing. I've got my writing partner and one of the fellow producers, Mark Barish, and he's the one that helped stitch all these stories together and create a very strong narrative. And he said to me towards the end of the film, he goes, James, we should get all the different descriptions of people describing how fast these UFOs go, and make a nice little compilation at the end during the credits. And wouldn't that be fun? And I said, that's a great idea. Let's do that.
And so it was a great idea. It worked really well.
Yeah, I don't know if you watched the film right to the end.
I did.
Highly recommend not to miss the credit roll, because there's a lot of juicy material that was going to end up on the edit room floor, and we kind of just pushed it aside. And then finally at the end, we said, let's do something really fun in the credits. And so we did.
Yes, I noticed that, and I thought that was a really neat idea. In fact, a couple of things. One question that came to mind, I don't hear, we got a lot of Chinese footage that actually didn't seem to get into the bulk of the film, but you had it at the end of the credits there.
Yeah, I went all across China for several weeks. I went twice. I studied the Mengjiao Gua case of 1994, which is an alleged landing incident and contact, and the same sort of messages that they got in China that they did in Africa the same year. I went around to, all across China. And
should I ask you why that wasn't included in the bulk of the film? I mean, what?
I hired a translator. We put this whole thing together. I went to Virginia 4 times. I covered the 1996 Virginia case, which is the Roswell of Brazil. And at the end of the day, there wasn't room. And I had to do, this thing we jokingly said in the edit room is kill your darlings. And we did. I mean, there were researchers in Australia, brilliant interviews, really amazing, really added to the story. I had to cut those out. There were researchers on Roswell. It just wasn't the room. Yeah, and I had to be brutal, and I had to do what I felt was best for the film and the flow of the film. And so I had to cut those things out. Can you imagine going to Brazil 4 times and not even a second of it ends up in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, that's rough. Maybe do you think you can use some of that, repurpose it for other projects, or is it just done?
Oh, no. I will. Oh, no. Gosh, no. I will utilize all the material I got.
It's a lot of work you put into that.
I put a lot of work into it, and blood, sweat, and tears, and chasing around witnesses in Brazil. My gosh, I could write a book on that episode alone. But in any case, yes, there will be. We're in talks with some cool stuff.
I'd like to ask you about one other of those early cases and have you talk about it. And this is, you did a lot of shooting in Australia, and you did a really nice treatment of the famous Westall UFO case of 1966, which is right outside of Melbourne. You had this. Can you just talk about that case and talk about dealing with the witnesses and so forth?
Well, I was at a conference. And I don't recall, maybe it was like 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and Paula Harris grabbed me by the ear, and she's like, get over here. You have to meet this guy, James Rigney. And he's an Australian researcher. He's a wonderful person, and you got to meet him because there was a landing case in Australia, at a school. And I thought, oh, come on. Why? When you hear about these mass sightings, for me, especially when they occur in broad daylight, with lots and lots and lots of witnesses, you simply say to yourself, how could something of that significance have taken place and the world not know about it?
Exactly.
Right. That's always been my response. And I didn't even look into the Rua case for, the better part of 10 years after I heard about it, because I simply didn't believe it. Because you just sit there and go, well, look, if it's broad daylight and you got like 50, 60, over 100 witnesses, in the case of Westall, there were probably over 200 witnesses, including the teachers. And, you just have to say, it's highly unlikely. But I have to.
One would think, however.
I have to tell myself, look, let's suspend judgment. I've learned time and time again, don't draw any quick conclusions. Review the evidence, listen to the witness testimony, because I've been surprised on more than one occasion. In fact, I've been surprised most of the time. That case was amazing because it was broad daylight and it landed, and there were literally, I talked to one of the school teachers who remained nameless, but he was telling me there were like over 250 kids outside at 10:30 in the morning during recess break. And
yeah, a lot of them ran out of the school. They saw this low object, flying saucer, and they just all ran after it. These are kids like 10 to 12 years old.
Yeah, darting around. There was all different ages, just darting around the sky, and then some other light aircraft, some small Cessnas were kind of playing cat. There was playing cat and mouse with a couple of these small airplanes, and everyone just stood there in amazement with their jaws dropped. And they watch it, and then it lands, goes off, and lands behind some trees, and a handful of kids jumped the fence, against the will of the teachers, and just off they went. Mm-hmm. And there it was, sitting on the ground, walked right up to it. And we interviewed those witnesses. We went to the exact landing site. And then there was a gentleman, I'll use his first name. His name is James. And he lived about 7 kilometers away. And 2 days prior to this incident, he took a photograph of a disc with a Polaroid camera. And he'd remained kind of in the shadows for 50 years. And we managed to get him for the first time in history on camera, showing us the Polaroid photograph that he'd taken. And then as well as one of the school teachers for the first time ever on camera, which honestly, if I told you how that went down, we'd be here for the next 3 hours. But suffice to say, we got this teacher on camera, provided he didn't want his face revealed, from the backside, and his name kept out of it. But it's like, gives you some indication of, the fear that was instilled in this gentleman over 50 years later, and he still doesn't want to talk about it.
Can you describe why? Because I recall, watching that interview that you did with him, and he was visited by some very scary government military types.
He got a knock on the door one night, and they threatened him. 2 men in suits. There were, I think it was 2 men in dark suits, and then one in uniform. And they basically told him in no uncertain terms, and they threatened him with a number of different, they're going to destroy his career. They're going to report him as being drunk. He'll never be a teacher again. They went through a whole slew of things that they're going to do to him.
Didn't one of them mention having something to do with the Official Secrets Act, or
yes,
basically implying that he would be in violation of the law? Yes. The implication is that he would go to prison. Yeah,
so there was the whole slew of things that he was threatened by. And he was a young man. He was in his early 20s, and he had his whole career ahead of him. And so he went silent. And I just commend him for having the courage 50 years later to come forward, because I think his testimony adds a lot of credibility to the case.
Absolutely. And also, the fact that most of the witnesses were young. They weren't little kids. They were old enough certainly to know what they saw, but they're mostly alive today. And you were able to interview quite a few of them. And when you listen to these people talk about the case, it's one of those cases that just seems like a slam dunk to me when you hear these many witnesses. And I thought your initial statement is right on point, which is you would think a mass sighting of a landing of a UFO in broad daylight would get international attention right away. Yeah. And yet here we were, like nothing happened, basically.
Well, it's interesting because I went on some news stations in Australia. I want to say Channel 8, but honestly, don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure. But it's the same news station that had arrived at the scene shortly after the sighting. And they interviewed students in and around the school, even despite the fact that they clamped the whole thing down. But there was some footage before the military had time to sort of really put the kibosh down. And the canister at the news agency, all these years later, because they keep archives, was empty. And I talked to the news people about it, because obviously I would have loved to have gotten my hands on that archival footage. But the canister was there and the film roll was gone.
Gee, I wonder where that went.
I know. If I had a dime for every time I heard that. Right? But the good news is that the students could talk about it now, and did talk about it now. And it's just as fresh today in their minds as it was 50 plus years ago.
Yeah. And this is one of those cases in your film where you really brought it to life. So this is something, it's now almost 50 years ago, 45, 44 years ago. But it's really fresh. And another thing that was fresh was a case from just 2 years before that, very famous case in the US and really around the world, the Lonnie Zamora, the Socarro, New Mexico landing case, I guess we could say. Can you talk a little bit about that case and how you put that together for your film?
Absolutely. Let me just give a shout out to Shane Ryan, because Shane Ryan was instrumental in helping put that piece together from the Westall landing case. I couldn't have done it without him. Couldn't have done it with all the Australians. They were incredibly, incredibly helpful. Mm-hmm. that case, it's so funny because you think, you know, oh, it was so long ago, 1964. It's kind of been there, done that.
Yeah.
I've got to tip my hat to Tracy Torme for encouraging me to go after that case, because I have to give credit where credit is due. And I was really glad that I did so, because I went to Socarro over a 5-year period. I got to know the family. I befriended his wife, Mary, his daughter, Diane, his son, Michael, his co-workers, the former sheriff. It took several years to them to kind of warm up to me and invite me in. I ended up actually buying Lonnie's truck, which I have back in California, which I've been slowly kind of fixing up on my own. But that case, there's so much more to that case. I met with Ray Stanford, who wrote the book Socorro Saucer in a Pentagon Pantry. We went to the National Archives together. I don't know if
Ray was one of the key early investigators of that case and wrote a lot about it. He's a brilliant man.
Yeah. And Ray was so funny because I was at his house doing interviews with him, and he had all the rocks from the landing gear still, and like where it was broken off, and the landing gear had scraped up against some of the rocks and shaved off pieces of metal, and all this fascinating stuff behind the scenes. And I said, Ray, you live right around the corner from the National Archives. We should go to the National Archives and see what we can find. And he's like, oh, nah, there's nothing there to see. Everything that's been, could be found has been found, and I'm not wasting my time. And we kind of got into a little bit of an argument.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, if you can have that kind of attitude, you're not going to come find anything. I said, well, suit yourself. I'm going. So I walk into his house. We get in this argument, and him and his wife are kind of bickering a little bit. Yeah. And I get in the car, get in my rented car, and just as I'm about to pull out the driveway, I see the curtain kind of draw, and I see his face, and he's like, hold on a second. And he comes outside and he says, okay, I'll go with you, but I'm going to take my own car, because after 10 or 15 minutes, I'll be thoroughly, exhausted from, I'm going to give up and go home. And I said, fair enough. Okay, great. So off we went. No sooner than probably, hour and a half, we'd been going through the microfilms and all that stuff. And finally we went up to one of the guys. We didn't know which floor to go on. We kept going back and forth. And finally I went to one of the managers in the department, and I said, sir, and I had Ray right next to me. And I said, sir, we're not finding what should be here. And I know this because this is Ray Stanford. He actually investigated this case personally, and he did it with Dr. Hynek. And there's photographs of him at the landing site, and there's all these other bits. And long story short, the guy says, okay. I'll tell you what, why don't you boys go out and get something to eat, and you come back in a little bit, and I'll see what I can do. So we both kind of looked at each other. Okay. So we went to the cafeteria. We had lunch, came back. And this guy, he's like, oh, I'm glad you guys are back. And he rolls out this cart. And Ray and I, it was like a kid on Christmas morning. I kid you not. It was like a halo around the cart. And you hear that sound go, oh. We knew it was good. I mean, we were giddy like little kids. And we looked at each other and was like, oh, this is going to be good. Rolls out not photocopies, not microfilm, the actual originals. So they give us gloves, and they set us up at this table, and they're like, look, here's the protocol. You got to get the thing, you got to pull the place.
So wait a minute. So these are original materials or
original
documents shot or what?
All the original documents, including like photographic slides, like everything they had from Project Blueprint, from that specific case, right down to little pieces of paper that the originals that Lonnie scribbled, the symbols, all that stuff. The original, like if something was signed, it was the original ink. I mean, we couldn't believe it. We finally realized that we were never going to get through this in one day. And they later said, well, we're terribly sorry, in actuality, because I said, well, I'm going to go back and get the original files from 1952, because I want to find out about the Capitol building those 2 consecutive weekends in July. And the woman said, sir, actually, we weren't really supposed to give you the originals, but since you have those, we can't give you any more, but you could have those until closing time. So I went off and I said, well, look, we can't do this fast enough, because I got to put this placement holder, I got to take this piece of paper, I got to walk across, put my quarter in, make a copy. And she said, well, if you get a flatbed scanner, you can do it right there at the desk. I said, really? So off I went to, a store, got a flatbed scanner. And long story short, Ray and I make a discovery. He actually found the document, but Ray actually shed a tear. There's been so much controversy over that symbol on the side of the craft. And I had been told from his family and from a few of the other witnesses in town, witnesses that were there that heard from Lonnie Zamora, that one of the first things they did, the military officers, when they arrived on the scene an hour later, is told him to change what the symbol looked like. That way they could quickly identify a hoaxer. If anybody claimed to have seen the same object and they said, yeah, that's the symbol.
Yeah. Just explain this a little bit. I mean, Lonnie Zamora saw a symbol on the craft that had landed. It was an egg-shaped craft. He saw two little,
Yes.
at first, they were like little beings.
One of the most well-documented close encounters of the third kind in U.S. history. It happened in April 1964 with a police officer named Lonnie Zamora. He initially got within a few hundred feet, 500 feet, whatever it was, put his head out the window, and he thought, gosh, he looks down this little ravine, it's an arroyo, and he thought it was a crashed vehicle of sorts.
Yeah.
He'd seen some smoke and a flash in the sky that kind of caught his eye, and he went off to investigate. And then he was kind of looking at his car window. The vehicle was stopped. He was still in his car, and he looks out the window and he sees two little people walking around the base of this craft. And he's just like, what am I looking at? And one of them turns and looks right at him in the eyes and just makes eye contact. And that really kind of jolted him. But anyway, he drove his car to get a closer look. But there was a symbol on the side of the craft, and there's been so much controversy swirling for over 50 years. And Ray Stanford in his book has been telling people, like, this is the real symbol. I'm telling you, I know he won't admit it, but they instructed him as soon as they got there to say it's supposed to be this, but it's actually this. And people have been giving him flack for decades, half a century. So when we found the document in Dr. Jalen Hynek's personal handwriting, he writes about it, but then he doesn't just write about what the symbol looked like. He actually drew it. So we have confirmation 110%. And there was, Ray Stanford in the National Archives holding up this document with his white gloves on and practically a tear in his eye.
Are you able to describe the symbol for people?
Yeah, it looks like a upside down V with one line at the top and two kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting case. What's also great about that, he was not alive by the time you were doing this, of course, but his wife, Mary, was around. You got her.
Yes.
And you also had there's a lot of film footage or video of the time that, like, I had never seen any of this before. And you brought out some witnesses as well in the immediate aftermath as well. I think, was it Pedro Lopez? Was that his name?
Yeah, I got the son of the
Pablo Lopez.
Pablo Lopez was the son of the dispatch officer. He was going to check on his dad to see what he wanted for dinner that night. It was like 4:50 or 4:55. He gets to the station, and he's like, 13, 14, 15 years old, and he hears the whole thing with Lonnie on the radio describing, like, I'm looking at something. I don't know what I'm looking at, and then the radio just kind of goes dead. Anyway, his father, I guess, was one of the first people at the site, and then he grabbed his son, and I don't know, within minutes, his son was there.
And they're he's like describing the ground is still smoldering. Yeah. They had a really good view of the imprints on the ground. Yeah. It's interesting because that case, like all great UFO cases, you find that no matter how good a case is, there's always going to be someone to come after it to try to take it down. And that case is no exception. So there's been all these different prosaic explanations to describe what Lonnie Zamora saw. But the thing is, when you get into the details of this case, I feel like any of those attempts to explain it away just fail because there's just too many bizarre things about this.
You had Quintanilla, who participated in a documentary in the 70s with Alan Sandler and Bob Emenegger called UFOs Past, Present, or Future. And in that documentary, they interviewed Quintanilla. I can never pronounce his name correctly. Is that right? Quintanilla?
I always said Quintanilla.
Quintanilla, sorry.
Who knows? He was the head of Project Blue Book at the time.
Yeah, and he's like, we went all the way to the office of the president. We never found out what that was. We were never able to provide a conventional explanation. He admitted it. And obviously, it was a turning point in Dr. Hynek's career, investigating stuff for the Air Force. That was the point. And actually, a little side note here that's kind of interesting is that one of the reasons Dr. Jacques Vallée, who initially got involved thanks to Lee Spiegel with our project at arm's length, and eventually when we got him in the studio, he saw all this amazing stuff and interviews that I'd done on the Lonnie Zamora case, and he thought, wow, this is great, because he was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in April of '64 with Dr. Hynek, and he was telling Hynek, look, you got to look at the cases that are explained away as psychological, because those cases are actually close encounters. This is what's happening in France in the 50s. They had a wave of close encounters of the third kind. We feature a little bit of that in the film, just a little bit. When you got the beans and everything else, the small beans. And he was telling Hynek this, like, please listen to me when I'm telling you this. And 2 days later, Hynek gets the call, landing case, Socarro, off he goes. And so that was very, Dr. Vallée saw the evolution of Hynek and coming to the conclusion that close encounters really do happen. And the pivoting point for him, for Hynek, was the Socarro landing case.
That's interesting. I have some thoughts about that as well. And I don't want to get sidetracked. I did remember reading a paper by Hynek in like 1959 or 1960, where he was actually giving a lecture to Air Force personnel. And one thing that you find about Hynek is he actually had a pretty sophisticated handle on worldwide UFO cases even then. And he definitely knew Aimé Michel in France from the 1950s and did follow a lot of those French landing cases. So I know he was familiar with it, but I believe you that Vallée probably had the ability to impress upon him the importance of these cases. And by the way, you have a lot of Vallée in this film.
I do.
Really nicely. You know, a very young Vallée, like young, short hair, like 25-year-old Jacques Vallée, this gangly, tall guy with like a crew cut.
Yes.
Who knew?
Yes. It's such an honor and such a privilege, and I cannot emphasize enough, that was all Lee Spiegel. And you know, it came down initially, like I said, he got involved sort of arm's length, I'll participate to a certain extent. But then as he got more familiar with the material, and I got to add one thing that's really kind of funny. I realized into this project when I started editing it that I couldn't do it at the studio at my house. It's just simply too many distractions. I had people coming and going at all hours of the night. My son would burst in the middle of an edit session. It just wasn't working. So I looked, and I had to be relatively close to the house because I had my son coming, going to school, and I had to pick him up, drop him off. So I couldn't do something far away. I couldn't find anything in my little town. I've been there forever. Finally, this woman calls me up and she says, well, I have the studio. It doesn't have any electricity or running water or toilet, but I can run an extension cord from the house. It's in a garden at the end of a dirt road. And I thought, well, you know what? In a pinch, I'll set up in the studio and I'll work here for a little bit till I can find something better. Well, the funny thing is that it was in such a peaceful place and it was so quiet and so well insulated that we got amazing, magical work was happening in this little studio. So the first time Jacques I'd really like to come out to see your studio. I said, well, Jacques, let me just let you know, it's at the end of a long dirt road. It's got no running water, no toilet, and no internet. And Jacques' phone was dead as a dodo when he got to West Marin, where I live. He had no phone whatsoever. So he'd come out there on these marathon edits, and he would sit in the back sometimes, and he would say, just the facts, ma'am. And I said, I was like, don't speculate, no conjecture, just the facts, ma'am, And he really kept us on course. And he really helped put the pieces of the puzzle together with Socarro, because I tell you, Jacques came in on the Socarro case, and we had it so long. It was like half an hour, and we had to whittle it down. And Jacques like, cut this, get rid of that. This is a
really, yeah.
Oh yeah, he was a monster. Yeah, it was great.
Well, the case was brought to life really well. It was
we spent. Oh my gosh, I spent 5 years on that case. Honestly, I mean, not 5 straight years, but we worked on that case for 5 years. Yeah, and it's only like 7 minutes, 8 minutes.
Well, it was enough to really do justice, at least I think for many people who are going to be watching it. And it's a funny thing, like for those of us who like live and breathe the UFO subject, like you do, like I do, and I think a lot of people watching this right now probably do. But there's a whole world out there that really never heard of Lonnie Zamora, that never heard of the Socarro case. It's really an amazing thing. We live in our own little UFO bubble. Yeah. But you of course realize that there's a whole world out there, and these people can really benefit from hearing about these cases and realizing, once again, this is not something that just started with the Tic Tac UFO. This is a long, long, long history. And it's, I think, very important that these are, made alive the way that you did.
I'd like to say something to the UFO community, if I may, and don't take this the wrong way, but I see like a couple, and I try not to engage in it, but you see like criticisms and stuff, you know, and I'm like, look, I'm trying so hard. We're all in this together. I really can't emphasize that enough. I tried to sprinkle as many fresh angles on this older material as I possibly could. I mean, William Nash, Al Chop. I got interviewed Kenneth Arnold's daughter, Kim Arnold. You know, I tried to put as much fresh stuff on there. But I mean, the history is the history, and if you're going to cover it, you know, what are you going to do?
You mentioned Nash. That's the Nash and Fortenberry. Those are the Pan Am pilots, I believe, in 1952. This is, you know, the big year. And I remember when I read about that case years ago, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. But again, you got, I think it was Fortenberry on video.
It was
Nash.
William Nash and William Fortenberry. William Nash. We got William Nash on.
Nash. Okay,
that was Tom Tooling.
Great.
Tom Tooling is part of the Oral History Project. I think it's Oral History Project. Yeah. But in any case, it was really funny because Mark Barish, you know, he's an incredible researcher, and he's reading online. He goes, James, we're in the middle of doing historical stuff. He goes, you know, I'm reading online that this guy that's got this footage, these interviews that he's done in the 80s on Beta SP. And long story short, we get in touch with this guy, and he says, no, I don't know what you're talking about. That's just a rumor. No, we don't have any of that. We thought, well, that's weird. So I approached him separately on my own, and I said, working with Jacques Vallée, my name's James Fox, do this. He goes, you working with Jacques Vallée? Oh, yeah, no, I have those tapes.
Wow.
He said, well, can I come out and meet Jacques Vallée? I said, yeah. So long story short, we flew him out from the East Coast, and we had a couple of dinners with Jacques in San Francisco, and he made those interviews available for us.
The quality of the video of those was excellent, frankly. I mean, you know, again, you've got this amazing encounter. I think they described the object at moving at speeds of up to 12,000 miles per hour or something like that. That's just astonishing. And you've got this highly qualified pilot talking about it on film. So really kudos for getting that.
Yeah, well, thanks to Tom Tooling. But think about, like, it's so interesting. I mean, there's a handful of sightings that I find so incredible. I mean, think about like the Nash and Fortenberry. They actually had these discs between them and the ground. They were flying. The UFOs were below them. They came out over this bay, and then they did this turn, and so they could really calculate quite accurately how fast they were traveling. And then these hairpin turns that they did at high speed. And like, I don't know how many years later, I guess that was 1952. So the interviews were done probably in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. This guy talked about it like it was yesterday.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
It's just like so amazing. And like Al Chop talking about, you know, just think about this for a minute. It's one thing to think about or to hear or read about, you know, the 1952 two consecutive weekends or the flyover over the Capitol building in July of 1952. But when you listen to Al Chop, who's in the radar room listening to the radio of the pilot traveling at 600 miles an hour in the pitch black,
all these objects over the Capitol, Washington D.C.
around his plane, and he's asking the people, "What do I do? They're all around me," and they all looked at each other and went, we didn't know what to tell him. We're not going to tell him to shoot him. We didn't know. We didn't say anything. But to hear to hear a guy who was there who witnessed that.
These are details that really didn't make it into the original accounts of the overflights of the Capitol in 1952. You don't really get that. So this is a level of detail. Like,
I got one more thing to add. Go ahead. Don't let me forget. Okay. Yep. Jacques Vallée was really, really passionate about this particular case. He's passionate about a lot of the cases. Jacques said they actually shot at that UFO and they actually hit it, and some of the pieces fell to the ground and were recovered. I said, Jacques, how do you know this? He said, I had a meeting with this guy. He was super high up. I'm so sorry that I can't remember the gentleman's name, and I don't generally talk about it publicly. But Jacques wanted that section of the film in. And I said, Jacques, I just have your testimony. He said, well, I got some newspaper clippings and I've got my testimony of a meeting in Washington, D.C. with this guy. I went back to his house. He told me about the pieces of metal, and we went back and forth on it. We had him in, we had it out, we had it in, we had it out. And eventually I just decided to take it out.
Well, I can add something to that, actually, because there is a very great Canadian UFO researcher in the 50s, Wilbert Smith.
Yeah.
Who he's pretty well known to, I guess, geeks out there who do this. Smith died, I think, in 1960, around that time. Toward the end of his life, he did an interview with two younger guys and said exactly that he had held in his hand at one time a piece of a UFO that had been shot out of the sky during the summer of 1952. And the interviewer said, well, where did it go? And Smith chuckled. He said, well, did it go to the Air Force? He's like, no. Did it go to the CIA? And he chuckled and said, no, much higher than that. If you really want to find this out, you're going to have to do some digging on your own or something like that. So you do have the testimony of this. I mean, Wilbur Smith was a very well plugged in researcher.
This was a guy that had optical photographic analysis that discovered missiles, Russian missiles in Cuba. God, I'm struggling for his name. He's a very high profile character, and they were testifying on the Hill on something unrelated. And Jacques was invited back to his home. I'm sure his name will come to me at some point, but anyway, Jacques had met with this guy, but it was a highly recognizable, practically household name of that era that shared that information with Jacques.
Oh yeah, this was Art.
Yes, Art Lundell.
Art Lundell, yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Absolutely.
Bingo.
Yeah, he was one of the most knowledgeable people in the UFO field in the world at that time. So yeah, all of that was like really well brought to life. Can we jump to you? You had a lot to say about UFOs over nuclear facilities. I thought that was interesting, and you talked a little bit about the Soviets. You had some footage of George Knapp and Igor Maltsev. Any of those that really stand out to you that you thought people should hear about?
Well, okay, so I've heard, obviously, and I've even featured some of these cases in Out of the Blue. Don't know if I actually addressed it, and I know what I saw. I don't think I did. But in any case, we were wrapping up the film when the New York Times article dropped, and it was funny actually because people were saying to me like, "Well, how are you going to end the movie?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know yet." I said, "I'm sure because ebb and flow. There's interest in the phenomenon, and then it kind of goes under for a little while, and then things surface, and I don't know, something probably is going to happen, and a sighting or something." And little did I know, I had no idea it was going to be that much of a bombshell on the front page of the New York Times. So we went back to the drawing board, obviously, and added about another 2.5 years of production. But when I went to meet with Harry Reid, we did this sit-down interview together, which was just, I had to pinch myself. I couldn't believe I was sitting in the same room with Senator Harry Reid. And it was a great interview, and he revealed a lot of wonderful things. And I said, Senator Reid, if you wouldn't mind, quickly, could we shoot a quick B-roll shot of us? He said, well, I have very little time, so let's get to it. And I looked at the cameraman and I said, well, let's just do it in that hallway over there. Forget about lighting, forget about audio. Let's just, get a couple shots walking. So we're walking down, and I figured, well, I might as well ask him something since we take advantage of the time I have. And I said, Senator, what was one of the more astonishing aspects of the phenomenon that you learned during ATIP? And he said, the objects going over very sensitive nuclear facilities and shutting off their weapons. And I went, oh my God, I can't believe he just said this. And so long story short, reached out to Robert Hastings, and I thought, I got to address this issue. Robert very generously made all of his material available. And he had so much material that I think we probably spent a better part of a year going through all of it and editing it down. And Mark Barish and I sat painstakingly in the edit room, putting it together, ripping it apart, putting it together, ripping it apart, and just trying to condense 20 hours plus down to 5 minutes or 7 minutes. But that was an incredibly fascinating aspect because, Launch Control Officer Robert Salas says, what does it say to you? To me, it's like he says it's like taking matches out of the hands of a baby. I mean, it's like that's a message. That's an intelligence. That's unbelievable, right? I mean, to me,
it's absolutely. And begging the question, well, who could be responsible for this? I mean, this story. Robert Hastings is an outstanding researcher, and his expertise has always been the relationship of UFOs with nuclear installations. And you're referencing a press conference he did 10 years ago where he gathered together a lot of these witnesses. They went to the National Press Club in DC. And that was a very powerful part of the documentary as well. Like you were able to, you boiled them down just nicely so that people could get a sense of just how baffling these cases were. And, what in God's name were these UFOs doing over our nukes? Why were they shutting them? They were disabling, silos, missiles that there's no logical reason for them to have been shut down the way that they were. It should not have been possible for this to happen. And yet it did. So that was, again, a very, very important part of this, I thought.
Landing in schools and shutting off nukes. What does that say to you?
It ain't us. It's not us.
But I mean, is it a coincidence? All these school sightings? I mean, there's apparently really good ones in LA and in France and all over the world, really.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's just so much. We're just skimming this. It's really amazing that there's so much here. We're just skimming it. You had a nice clip of Edgar Mitchell, which made me happy to see. And by the way,
I had to put that in. I loved Edgar Mitchell.
Well, absolutely. And the thing that he said that I definitely, that got my attention, he said, well, he was talking, I think, explicitly about materials and bodies that were recovered. So you have an Apollo moon astronaut saying that by itself is incredible. And then he said, well, there are people who know about this, who may or may not be in the government, and was really strongly hinting that this whole thing was taken out of the government and really had moved into the private sector. And I was glad to see that in there. Well,
when I met with Edgar Mitchell at his house, I'd known him through phone calls and stuff like that prior to that. And I jokingly said to him while we were walking in his he had horses, and we were in the corral with the horses. And I said, Dr. Mitchell, I'm so honored. I'm so grateful and honored. And, how come you decided to meet with me? And he goes, well, I realized I was expecting some really profound, he goes, I realized you just wouldn't go away. But he said something to me that I won't forget. He said that when he came back from the moon, he was quite famous, obviously, and he'd grown up outside of Roswell as a kid. Yeah. So when he went back in the 70s, he knew all those ranchers. They knew him. And they're the ones that confirm, intelligence agencies as well. But he got double confirmation. He got confirmation from the ranchers that, of course, knew all about it and confirmed with him. And then, of course, the people in the intelligence agencies who had shared stuff with him.
Well, and maybe we can get into the fact that he met with Stephen Greer and Admiral Thomas Wilson in 1997 and had that whole thing happen, which I wouldn't mind asking about that at some point, because I noticed you had James Rigney, who you mentioned him earlier, and James, of course, is very much involved in that. In fact, can I ask you right now, I saw a clip of you just recently where you were asked about the Admiral Wilson notes, and I don't mean to ambush you here. Yeah. You've already talked about it, and you actually said, I thought you were on the right side of this, of course, where you seem to give the notes some credibility in your opinion.
Okay, so here's what I know. And I didn't, because initially I got asked about it, and I just said, yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't want to step into that one, right?
No. Keep in mind that I've been incredibly busy trying to put this film together. I mean, the best way I can describe it to those of you out there is, if you could imagine being in a ring with a monster and you're just trying to survive the next round, that's honestly what it's been like for me for the last 7.5 years, and especially the last 2 years. I mean, it's whoa. And so I got a was it a text or a Facebook message from James Rigney, and he's like, this is huge. I've got this is huge, And I was like, yeah. If I had a dime for every time I've heard that, He's like, no, I got to send this email. So of course he sends it off to him, but I didn't really pay close enough attention. But then I met with the goddaughter of Edgar Mitchell. Her name is Antares. She was named after the landing site when Edgar Mitchell landed on the moon. Antares, one of the craters or landing sites. And she's doing a film on him. And she said, it was absolute mayhem when he died, because he died somewhat unexpectedly, and that people were coming and going and taking stuff and moon rock, whatever, just kind of like having at it with his stuff. And there was some people that came in and there were some highly sensitive documents that just sort of walked their way out of his house. So I'm not sure exactly who initially put their fingers on that document, but it sounds like it came out of Australia to me.
Well, it's actually known, very well known to a very small group of people, who is the identity of the person who ended up getting the sensitive documents, particularly the what we call the Eric Davis notes or the Admiral Wilson notes.
Right.
And as I know, I want to move on, but I will just say to you that someone very close to all of that showed me those documents directly in 2006. I've known about this forever, and I'm not the only one, by the way.
Yes.
So, but I was heartened to hear you talk about it. You did a pretty good job. I just want to commend you on that. So well done.
Well, thank you.
It takes some bravery to stick oneself out on some of these controversial subjects, because everyone just wants to take it down. But yeah, that's all real. And whether the information in there is 100% or not, that's a whole other issue. But the interview took place, the notes are real.
Can I say something? Speaking of real, that really shocked me, and I'm still in shock about it. And you guys know from my previous works, I know what I saw on 50 Years Denial and Out of the Blue. I've never dealt with close encounters of the third kind before. Excuse me. I've always felt that it was kind of slightly taboo, and it's a slippery slope. And, I've kind of kept my distance with it. Excuse me. I'm drinking this kombucha. And I knew.
Big fan of kombucha over here.
Oh, good. I knew how careful I had to be covering these close encounters of the third kind, because I'm dealing with like high-level elected representatives and military government officials that might just want to pull their names off this project altogether when they find out it deals with, oh yeah, and a UFO landed in Africa and the occupants got out and made telepathic communication with a bunch of kids.
Yeah, let's get into this one. This is such an amazing case. The Rua's Zimbabwe 1994 landing, the Ariel school. Talk about this to your heart's content. I really would love to hear you give the story about this for people.
Okay. Well, Randall Nickerson is the one that really deserves credit on that project. He's been working on it for,
years, many years.
10 years, 12 years.
Yeah.
And when I initially heard about the case in the 90s, I was just, naive enough to think that I could pull off an interview with Steven Spielberg. And we had a mutual friend in common, this woman, Janet Yang. And I contacted her and I said, hey, do you think you can hook me up with an interview with Spielberg? Anyway, she tried, and a couple weeks later, she called me up and she goes, yeah, he's not going to meet with you, but he does want you to know, and this was like 1997, 98, 97. He does want you to know that there was a landing case in Africa at a school.
Wait, Spielberg?
Spielberg said this, yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a landing case in Africa at a school, and he thinks you should look into it. He thinks it's one of the most compelling modern day UFO encounters. And I was like, okay, not going to do that. Like, I just literally said the same thing that I'd said earlier. There's no way something can occur in broad daylight with nearly 100 witnesses and the whole world not know about it. Okay, so forget about it. So I'll fast forward to 2000, and I heard a little bit about it in 2005, 2006. Didn't pay much attention. 2007, when I was doing the National Press Club event with Leslie Kane, and Leslie is good friends with Randall, and she introduced me to him. Randall's working on this case in Africa. I was like, oh, I've heard about that. And anyway, that sort of reinvigorated my interest, into the topic. And then, I got a hold of some of the archive material of the children being interviewed with Dr. John Mack.
Yeah.
That was, my God, like,
it's powerful.
Yeah, these kids are saying the same thing. There's so many of them. And there's a Harvard psychiatrist who's interviewing them. And, I was profoundly moved by their testimony.
And they were so intelligent, so well-spoken. They really seemed older than their years, didn't they? In those.
Oh my gosh, yes, and had a profound encounter. You imagine being that old, having something that significant happen, and then having the adults just like pretty much, brush you aside, not really believing you, and having to process that as a child all on your own.
It's a well-known case, but could you describe, because not everyone probably knows what happened, and I bet they would love to hear your description of it.
Yeah. So basically, it was 1994. It was in a rural area just outside Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe. And I think it was around 10 o'clock in the morning break on recess. And there had been sightings in the area that had been reported on the news over the last couple of periods, and particularly in South Africa, and sightings in Rua over like several days. And even the day before, I think some of the students had seen a craft that got within, treetop level, but didn't land. But this particular day, this UFO landed. In fact, there was testimony that a number of UFOs landed. And they landed right on the outside of the playground. And the way it was described to me, and I actually went there, but they would put big logs that would define the outer perimeter of the playground. And the children weren't allowed to go beyond those logs because the meadows, the fields were not mowed, and there were snakes and deadly things out there. They were very adamant the kids were not allowed to go beyond that area. So the kids, being kids, would go all the way out to where the logs are, the farthest extreme perimeter of the playground, and they would skip along the logs. Well, some of the children described, as adults told me, that when this UFO landed and the occupants got out, they were joyfully and playfully dancing along, floating almost above the grass. I know this sounds crazy, but they were dancing like along and playing with the children as they were skipping along these logs.
These beings.
Yes. And really playfully and non-aggressive and non-threatening. And they said, and as adults, they told me this, and I don't know why this didn't end up in the movie because I find it fascinating, but they said, if you've ever been out in the wilderness and you come across a rare sighting of a wild creature, and there's a moment of pause between you and the creature and a moment of curiosity and intrigue where it's almost like time stops and you're looking at one another, and it's a benign encounter, but there's a fascination and curiosity that you're just as baffled by what you're looking at as they are you.
Yeah.
And that's what they described the encounter. And then the children and the eyes of the creatures kept going, because the children were all lined up. They say there were 66. There were actually closer. There was 66 that went on camera, but there were over 100 students that were actually playing that day. And a lot of them got a front row seat. They were standing in a line next to each other. Some of them just froze. Some of the kids didn't really know what was going on, but they would stand there. And apparently the creature was standing there, and he was looking from eyeball to eyeball to the kids. And that some of the kids got as close as a meter away, which is like you could reach out and touch this thing.
Yeah.
And when they locked eyes, that's when the telepathic communication occurred, and that's when the imagery of destruction on the planet if we didn't become better stewards of our environment, and that was relayed to them, to a number of them. How prophetic, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, these were the best description is that they seem like classic short gray aliens, right?
Yes, and big eyes. I mean, all the kids described these big eyes, and they were mesmerizing. And when you looked in the eyes, you lost track of time. They didn't even know how long the encounter took place for. They would appear here, and it was almost like they were just kind of all over the place. Like they could just kind of.
I think in your film, one of the witnesses explicitly described these beings as they had big head, big black eyes, kind of wraparound eyes, and am I right in remembering a black bodysuit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Yeah, a black bodysuit, like a wetsuit. Yeah, they described it as a tight-fitting black bodysuit, and I think the duration of the encounter was roughly 10 to 15 minutes in length. And funny enough, when with the help of Randall, we brought these. And by the way, Randall's got his film coming out soon. I'm very excited about that.
Which is called Ariel.
Ariel Phenomenon.
And, I've been looking. Tracy and I have been waiting for that one to come out for a long time.
Yes.
I had Randall over to our home a year or two ago, along with Emily Trim, who is one of the witnesses as well. Yeah, the wonderful.
So sorry. When I went to Africa, Judy Bates, who's now the headmistress, who was a teacher at the time, she's like, well, you can help yourself, go out, do the filming, bring the witnesses, no problem, go to the landing site, just help yourself. Just the place is yours. Film wherever you want to film. I said, great, but I don't really want to get involved. I said, great, thank you. I really appreciate that. We were out there filming for a couple of days. One day, I was out there with a handful of her former students. We were next to the landing site, and out comes Judy Bates. She recognized some of the students. She wanted to come say hello. And off the cuff, I had the cameras rolling, and she started talking. And I said, Judy, please, can I just get a little bit of a statement? Well, I don't know what I'm going to say that's going to be of any interest to anyone, and she just had a little facial surgery for some cancer that she had removed, and she had a bandage on her nose. And she said, well, okay, do it now. I looked at the camera guys, I turned the cameras onto Judy, and we got this magical, unexpected, just moment together where she said, I'd like to apologize to the students. I'd like to apologize that I wasn't there for you. And I had my own reasons and experiences that I was dealing with.
That was very touching.
Very touching.
Yeah.
Very touching.
You can really feel for a lot of these folks, like, something that extraordinary happens at the time, and it's totally beyond your ability even to know how to process it. And I think, you get with something as bizarre as UFOs, I think a lot of people just shut down and they don't really know how to deal with it. But you could see it was actually very touching to me to see her. She clearly had some regret over kind of blowing these kids off, essentially, right?
One thing that blew my mind, and I just get chills talking about it. I just couldn't believe this. With the help of Randall, when we brought these students together in LA for the first time, a lot of them for the first time in 20 years, we brought them together. Coincidentally, as a side note, some of them were at the round table going, Emily, wait, we were standing next to each other. We were holding hands. Wait, don't
wow.
So I was standing right next to you. You were, it was like this amazing thing that was happening. And they literally said, some of them, they didn't even tell, like when they came to America 20 years later to do this, they were like, I haven't even told my husband. I haven't told my partner. I haven't told.
Incredible.
You got to be kidding me. You have kids with this man and you haven't told him? She said, I was tired of defending it. I didn't want it to come up. And I just thought, wow. Could you imagine having to live with that experience and not even tell your partner for 20 years? I mean, not 20 years, but not talking about it.
So, this from all the folks you've interviewed over the years. This is just such a difficult thing for people to process. You often find that they just put it into a little corner of their mind somewhere, and they frequently will just try to live their life, and because they don't know what to do with it. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit in our reality.
And she said, I was tired of defending myself.
Yeah. It's sad.
I know it's sad. And that's one of the things I'm really happy about with this film. And I've heard this from a number of people. They were like, finally, a film that you cover the human element, the human factor. Like it feels like it's personal. It's the effect of this case. Look at Lonnie Zamora, like how sad that his entire career was lost.
Mm-hmm.
He was just doing his job, telling the truth. And his career was over.
Right.
And he ended up working at a dump site on the edge of town because he said, quite honestly, he was tired of talking about it and everybody looking and pointing and making fun of him. Could you imagine?
Very sad.
I know.
We've actually been doing this for more than an hour. I can't believe we've been going along as we have.
Real quick.
And I can't let you.
Real quick.
Jump in.
It touched my heart. I was so pleased. I got a text message from Diane Zamora, Lonnie's daughter, and she said, thank you. I saw the movie. Thank you. You did my father's sighting. My dad's story. And I was profoundly touched by that.
Yeah, I think that's just fantastic. We can come back to this, and I have a couple of questions actually that have been forwarded to me from some of the people watching, but I have to ask you to comment at least a little bit on Jacques Vallée and Gary Nolan's work. You have such a sliver of this referenced. And honestly, that's like the biggest tease of the whole documentary. It's like you've got Vallée, Nolan. They're doing, everyone who's like following this knows they're doing something very, very important.
Yeah.
They've got a material. A lot of people have heard of the metamaterial that, TTSA sent off to the Army. Hal Puthoff gave a very interesting speech on that a couple of years ago. But this is something different. And we don't really know a lot about it, but you gave enough of a teaser to talk about, like, they're analyzing the atomic structure of this thing, and it's beyond end. The isotopic ratios are all different and unique. Please unpack this as much as you can. People need to hear this.
Okay, so I am a complete neophyte. I'm your average Joe citizen. I am completely ignorant to anything analysis-wise that they're doing. Obviously, I learned the fundamentals because I was there in the lab with them filming, and I knew that I was witnessing something very big. I mean, there was no question when I was in the lab.
Even like you had a couple of minutes, and it was very powerful. But please continue.
Yeah. So we initially had done a much longer version of that. And there was some concern, and I got to be careful with what I say here, but there was some concern, I think, with Gary's association with Stanford. And we had to be careful what we say. We had to be careful what they say, because things got a bit carried away in the studio when the cameras were rolling. Some things I think were out of their comfort zone. So we had to reel it back a little bit and shorten it. And Jacques' position is, look, we're on the verge of discovering something truly incredible, but we need to go through the proper steps of having this published in a scientific journal and having it reviewed before we can make any definitive conclusions and statements. And so what we have is just a bit of a teaser that there is real scientific analysis, real science taking place in this lab, and it's ongoing. And it's going to be very, very exciting. I think the ultimate what happens. And Gary would like to use the technology to do good things. Yeah,
that was one really interesting quote you got out of him, which was no one wanted to speculate, not Gary, not Jacques Vallée, on what this thing was. But Gary Nolan did explicitly state in your film, I want to be able to exploit this for contemporary technology applications. But since you're not going to say it and they're not going to say it, I mean, the implication is, I'm just going to say it. They have a material that they and very possibly no one really knows how to explain. It seems to be manufactured. The way that they're describing it, this is not a natural material. They acquired it through some means, presumably some kind of crash retrieval or some artifact left behind, and it is shocking the hell out of them. And that seems to be the big takeaway. Like no one seems to be able to explain how this thing could have been manufactured the way they did. It's kind of similar to what one, would hear about the metamaterial and all of that. This seems to be something along the same lines. Is that more or less accurate?
Yeah, that's definitely an accurate analysis of it or evaluation of it. There are multiple sources of metals. It's not just one location. There's stuff that Jacques has gathered around the world over the last 50, I don't know how many decades, but many decades. And Jacques was so funny, he was walking around the lab. We kind of kept making fun of him because he literally was cradling all of his material like this. He did not let those things get out of sight. Like they were right there the whole time, right? And I said, Jacques, God, you're looking kind of paranoid here. What's going on? He goes, these things have a strange way of disappearing.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Socarro, and I mean, the famous thing about that, this is Ray Stanford's whole thing. Ray wrote about this in his book, which was, there was on one of the rocks at the Socarro site, there was metallic debris that seemed to have been left from the craft. Ray kept this. He took it to the DC area, or I'm trying to remember where exactly it was, but that whole thing was scraped clean.
Yeah. Well, what happened was
scraped clean.
The object was rather heavy. The UFO was really heavy, and the landing gear compressed the soil significantly. And there were lots of rocks, and it broke a rock in half, and it was the sharp edge of the rock took metal shavings off the landing gear. And those metal shavings, it's a crazy story actually, because Ray Stanford was at the landing site within a day or two, and he's with Dr. Hynek. And I don't remember exactly if it was 2 days or 3 days or 1 day, whatever. It was very fresh. And they're with Lonnie Zamora. I think Lonnie Zamora was even in uniform. And Lonnie was like, to Ray and to Dr. Hynek, he goes, that landing gear kind of broke a few rocks on the way down and kind of broke them right in half. Kind of like looking like, and Ray,
take a look.
Oh my
Check it out.
God. And Ray said, oh my God, he's implying that you might want to take a closer look over here. Well, Hynek didn't pick up on the cue, according to Ray. And Hynek's like, look, I got a press conference down in town. I got to go. So Ray came back there that night with a flashlight and recovered metal shavings. Well, fast forward. Oh, God, I don't know how much I can reveal here, but, Ray has his whole thing, and he gets them analyzed at a lab somehow through NASA. And then
this is a pretty well-known story, actually.
Ray dropped one of them in the grass.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Ray dropped one of them in the grass. He's like, myself, I can't believe it, but I dropped one of them in the grass. Oh, I said, God. Ray, why didn't you stay there? You found it. He goes, I couldn't find it, James. I'm telling you. He's like, didn't want to talk about it, because I could tell 50 years later he was still livid that he'd lost it in the tall grass. So then the other pits, the initial analysis, and it was in, I want to say it was in D.C. It was part of NASA.
Yeah, it was near D.C. It was
DC. Yeah. Anyway, the guy calls him up. I was like, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe this. The initial analysis is like these things are not from this world, basically." And Ray's like, "Oh, he's super excited." And then he gets a call like a couple days later. They're like, "Yeah, they're all gone. It was nothing."
Well, and that guy disappeared and was replaced by someone else, and the whole thing just went away.
Well, let me say one thing about that case, because having known and spoken to Ray about what had gone down and the rock and the piece and the shavings, yada, yada, yada. Well, I managed to get an interview with his coworker, and the guy he worked with for like, I want to say the better part of 20 or plus years out of the landfill. And it took quite some convincing to get this guy to go on camera. And I won't bore you with the details, but eventually he did, and with the help of Mary Zamora, and he did it for Mary. Then we were talking, and he said, we worked together for a couple of decades, and we never talked about the incident, not once. And he said, towards the end, when Lonnie was going to retire, he said, Lonnie, if you don't mind, I'd really like to hear. And Lonnie said, you want the story? And he said, yeah, if you wouldn't mind. And Lonnie said, you know what? You've been really good to me, and you've never asked me, and it's been all these years we've worked together. I'll give it to you. So he told him. He described the beans, he described all that stuff, and then Lonnie said, and he said he had a piece of metal from it. I said, what? He goes, yeah, he said he had some shavings from the landing gear. I went, really? And
wait, Lonnie Zamora had?
Lonnie Zamora told his coworker.
Uh-huh.
So let's just say that I did everything in my power with the help of Mary, because I found out that he had a sudden death. So he didn't have time to arrange any of his affairs. Mm-hmm. I did one of the most significant search efforts in the history of search efforts.
Wow, to find that.
As you can imagine, right?
Sure, yeah.
So there's a lot of little angles, little hidden treasures, a lot of things about that story that didn't make it in the film.
I have a question from someone. Tracy's collecting questions from people who are watching here. And this is related to the Lonnie Zamora case from Ken Staniford, who just wants to ask, what did the psychological evaluation contain for Lonnie Zamora? It's rumored to have been part of his return to the job. I didn't quite remember that. Do you know anything about that? Did he have to take a psych eval to go back to the...
I did not hear anything about that. He's a police officer, maybe, but I certainly didn't hear about that. But he didn't have that. He wasn't a police officer much longer. I don't know how much longer, but it wasn't much longer, So I don't know. I'm sorry. Is it Ken? Was it?
Yeah, Ken Staniford.
Ken, I'm sorry. I don't have an answer for that.
Well, I have another Lonnie question from Brian Drummond, who just says, I think the Lonnie Zamora case is a great example of a possible breakaway civilization or advanced relic terrestrial civilization. The fact that a symbol was on the craft seems way too familiar to be from another world. That's an interesting take. You have any thought about that?
Well, as Ray Stanford himself said, why would they, if they had an extremely advanced, super secret, project landing, and why would they have midgets flying in it?
Exactly. There's these short little guys.
Yeah, that's what Ray's answer to that one was. And not only that, but although it did make a little bit of noise with this blue flame, and people think, oh, it was a rocket, but it was not a rocket. It was a blue flame that pierced the ground like a knife through butter and didn't stir up the dirt at all. Like people think it was like all this. Yeah, there was noise, but it was a blue flame that pierced, went right through the earth. It didn't reflect off the ground and stir up the rocks. It was just this blue flame. And then when it got about 20 to 30 feet, the blue flame gone, sound gone, silent. You could hear a pin drop, and it just stood there, you know.
Well, I'm just going to I'm going to say to Brian that I've got my own theory that I'm developing on all of this, so I'm going to come back to that. So I do have some thoughts about that in terms of what the origin of this might have been. But I mean, in general, these are not people from our civilization, and we can get into maybe where they're from another time. Can I ask you a couple of other questions from people who are watching here? James?
Oh, please. Yes.
Yeah. So this is from John Zeitvogel. Zeitvogel. That means time bird in German, I believe. John asks, with so much coming out and the narrative on this subject being pushed toward the mainstream, I wonder when we will begin to hear discussions about more aggressive Senate probes and congressional hearings into this matter. You know Leslie Kean pretty well, and she's got her finger on that pulse. Do you have any idea about, and you've spoken to Harry Reid, who's retired, but still, any ideas as to whether or not you think the U.S. Senate or Congress would take any more initiative into this at all?
You know, who's got his finger on the pulse is Christopher Mellon.
Chris Mellon, absolutely, yeah.
And one of the reasons, and they've got a report that's supposed to be coming out at any moment, which is basically an assessment that's supposed to be made public of what's going on. And that was announced, I think, 6 months ago, and 6 months is pretty much now. One of the reasons why I did a call to action at the end of the film, I didn't want to just educate the public. I wanted the public to reach out to the representatives and really rattle the cage and just say, hey, demand government transparency, demand some sort of action. Look, they hear from their constituents enough, they're going to take action. They're not going to reach out and do it on their own. They need to know that they've got the support of us because we're the ones that put them in office. And if they start going off on a tangent with UFOs, you know, obviously, I'm sure they're curious, but they need to hear from us. So that's one of the reasons why I did that. And according to Chris and according to Lou Elizondo, who, to my absolute amazement, publicly endorsed the film on Twitter and talked about it. Yeah, and then a bunch more stuff. I've got a mainstream producer. I'm not sure if I mentioned his name is Dan Farah. He's done a lot for this film and getting the word out there. He produced Ready Player One with Spielberg, and he's been sort of quarterbacking all the promo and reaching out. I mean, he works like a machine 17 hours a day. And he had some lengthy conversations with Lou Elizondo. And Lou is basically saying that this film is going to really be a huge tool to sort of educate the people. And also he feels that because of the credible nature, because we set out to do sort of a 60 minutes, you know, frontline treatment of the topic.
Right.
And but, you know, that's what needs to happen, right? And that he thinks that it's very likely that there's going to be a lot more participation in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this film has the potential for really tremendous impact. I want to ask one or two other questions. There's a gentleman named Alan who submitted a lot of questions. I'm just going to do one, and I really want to hear what you say to this. He says, ask James if he felt Colonel Robert Friend came clean in the film, or does he feel that Colonel Friend was still playing his role as the ex-head of Blue Book? You had some pretty good statements by Robert Friend, who only recently passed away. I think he was very old. I met him as well once, and it was quite interesting. But yeah, he was always he was very coy.
Yes.
All these years about UFOs, would really never give anything up. But you got something out of him. What can you say what Robert Friend said in the film, and then also just your own take on Bob Friend?
Yeah, so Bob Friend, it wasn't so much what he said, it was the way he said it. And he kind of gives you this little smirk, right? He says, I said, oh, you mean they closed it because they found out what it was? And he's like, or they did, or no, I said, because they didn't know what it was. And he's like, or they did know what it was.
They did know what it was. And you tried to steer him away from that, but he kept going right back to that.
He gave me this little smirk like,
yeah.
Oh, I mean, that's Jock's favorite section of the entire movie, because that look says it all. So
I agree.
I feel that Robert Friend, you know, kind of dropped a bomb on us there.
That was the farthest I think he ever went publicly in what he had to say about the reality of UFOs. I don't think he was always a tough nut. I met with him privately, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, and he was tough then. And we were not even recording anything. I'm like, come on, just like let loose, man. And he just wouldn't give me anything.
He was pretty open about the 1952, you know, flights over. Of course, he wasn't part of. I mean, he wasn't in Blue Book as the director at that point. But he, you know, he said to me, he goes, you know, we really don't know what those were. Like that's, you know, he was really kind of like,
yeah, but actually they do. And the other thing I would just want to say is when you were interviewing Harry Reid.
Yes,
we went through that whole fiction again. So Harry Reid starts out with you as like, well, we really needed to get, you know, when he wanted to start ATIP, we need to get this thing investigated, as if no one had a clue, as if there'd never been any classified investigation of this. Look, it was great that he did this, that he got Congress to kind of open this up. And he talked about all the resistance, like the really strong resistance and enemies that they developed as a result of the program. So all of that, and this is, I just call it like a polite fiction. But then you have Reid really letting his guard down in that interview that you've got where you're just sitting right across from him. And I think he made it very clear. I'm trying to remember his exact statement, but he made it very clear, I thought, that, oh yeah, like there's absolutely a cover-up. There's a clandestine investigation going on. I mean, that was my takeaway. Was that what you thought, or what did you think?
We talked about, I'm trying to remember who I'd interviewed. Did I interview Fravor at that point? I think I did.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about Fravor. That was a very nice interview you did with him.
Yeah, but I'd heard that some of the material basically that was released was just, there was so much more of it. Might have been, actually, you know what? It might have been George Knapp that told me. In fact, it was George Knapp that told me. We met kind of clandestine little place in Las Vegas. But I was bringing up my interview as an example of evidence that hasn't been released to Harry Reid. And I said, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go beyond his comfort zone or not. And I said, well, I interviewed Gordon Cooper back in the 90s, and Gordon shared with me an incident that happened at Edwards Air Force Base circa 1987. He had a crew of people filming the installation of a F-86 fighter jet landing strip or something. And it was broad daylight, and all of a sudden they saw this disc, and they turned their cameras on it, and this disc lands on the dry lake bed and sits there for a couple of moments. I think they started walking towards it, and then it lifted back up again, gear in the well, and poof, off it went. And he had the film footage developed. And then he said he looked at the film when he held up the light, and he looked at it and saw the disc, and all, it was good film.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, higher ups, and I'm telling Senator Reid the story, and I said eventually a courier jet came in from Washington, and he handed the footage over, and then Senator Reid goes, and it was never seen or heard from ever again. I said, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, Reid knew the deal.
So then I said, so you telling me that? Oh, then he said it's all there. It's all, well, that stuff's there. And I said, you're telling me that there's evidence that hasn't seen the light of day? And I thought, ooh, I might have really pushed it here. And he's got like security, guys, they're looking at me if I get too close to him. And it was just kind of tense. And I thought, did I push that one a little bit further? And he picks up his water bottle and takes a sip, and I could see he was processing how he's going to deal with this one. Right. And he goes, puts the cap on, he goes, I'm telling you that most of the evidence hasn't seen the light of day. And I was like, whoa.
That was a drop mic moment for Harry Reid, actually.
Yeah, that was pretty.
And in fact, you just reminded me, we didn't even talk about Gordon Cooper. That was such a great part of it also. Now, in the interview where there's Cooper there talking about this, that wasn't you interviewing him, or was it? Did you do that interview?
So there was 2 interviews. They were fused together. One of them was an interview that was done in the 70s by Lee Spiegel, which was audio only. And then there was an on-camera interview that I had done, and we put the 2 of those together. So
okay.
Spiegel, and then an interview that I did with him. What I liked about Lee Spiegel's interview is that despite being audio only, it's very crisp, clear. He's much younger. He's much more vibrant and just alive. I think he had Parkinson's a little bit when I met with him in the 90s. He was all there. He just couldn't speak as clearly as he could. So that's what that was.
Well, the thing that struck, this had to be your interview with Cooper then. So he's on video, on film. And you asked him at some point, hey, have you ever been able to get in touch with any of the people who might have had access to that film? And his answer was just perfect. He was like, almost like, what are you, crazy? There's no way. It's not possible to get in touch with these people.
Yeah, he was. You could tell that bothered him. You know, could you imagine? Could you imagine like handing over definitive evidence? Think about that for a minute. Think about all the stuff they're sitting on. I mean, come on, all the accounts that we've heard. You know, if I had a penny, you know, and they've got an. Oh, I'll tell you something that's really funny. I was finishing up. I Know What I Saw. I was totally broke. I was trying to get the film wrapped up. I was living in San Diego with a buddy of mine, and I had my house rented out up north because I just couldn't afford to live there at the time, so I rented it out. My buddy said, "Oh, come on down, you can stay with me for free." And I got a job at a production facility that was kind of like while I was finishing I Know What I Saw, and I was working for a woman who was in her late 70s or early 80s, and her husband had just turned 80, and she said, "Oh, son," I was doing a video for them, like putting a collection of video of this man's life, and they were quite well to do. And she said, "Oh, you know, James, what else do you like to do?" And I thought, "Oh God, here we go." I said, "Well, I'm making this documentary on UFOs. It's going to be done in a couple months." She's like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I have a story I'd like to share with you." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" She said, "Well, back when I was in college, we were having a little get together with my roommates one night in our college dorm, and someone across the way was General Twining's son. And one night he came in and he was having beers with us in my dorm room. And he said to us, and I want to say they were probably the late 50s when she met with him, maybe the early 60s, but I think it was the late 50s. And she said, one night they were having beers, and he said, "Oh, I got a tour of at the Pentagon underground of all these videos and all these photographs and all this evidence for UFOs." And he was bragging about it to these girls. And she's like, "I remember it like it was yesterday." Isn't that fascinating? So there is a repository somewhere, and it might be in the Pentagon. It might probably be in the Pentagon. I mean, you remember Chase Brandon? Or was it Chase Brandon?
CIA liaison to Hollywood.
Thank you. You remember that? Remember he stumbled upon something when he was looking for something else about Roswell.
He said that there was a Roswell file or a box at CIA that or is it? Yeah, I think a Roswell.
Yeah, he said to me, he goes, "Well, let's just put it this way," because I think they kind of put the kibosh down on him pretty hard when he talked about it in his book. Kind of a side note, but he's like, "Let's just put it this way. I had all the evidence. I saw all the evidence I needed that was real."
Yeah, I just want to mention one thing about Nathan Twining's son. If he's alive, I don't think he's well. I don't know if he's alive, but there are some stories about him. I've met people who knew him in later years, and he had a lot to say about his father and the UFO realities for his entire life. So just an interesting guy. I don't know how much more I can keep you, James. We've been going a little more than an hour and a half. There's a question here from Anthony Riley who wants to ask you if there's any progress on obtaining the Chuck Clark footage that you've spoken about previously. Oh, probably shouldn't have asked that.
God, I wish.
What can you just? Do I know what that is? I'm not sure what that is.
He's spot on. So,
what is that?
When I was doing, I got to give you this story. This will be my last story, but you got to do this because I can't not tell you what the Chuck Clark story is. When I was doing my first UFO doc in the 90s, I covered Area 51. Area 51 was kind of a subject back then. I think that Bob Lazar was catapulted in late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
I think it was probably like 95, 96, 97. I was working on it. And there was a guy in Rachel that was a former military guy by the name of Chuck Clark. And he wrote like a little handbook called the Area 51 Guidebook or something. And he had figured out all these different vantage points that he could access that wasn't violating, like he wasn't trespassing. And he could look down onto the base, and he had high telescopes, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
And he had a pretty cool UFO encounter with something that was probably connected to the base. And so I interviewed him about that. And we got to know each other quite well, and I'd go out at night with him, and, went back and forth probably a handful of times. Well, I get a phone call from him out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Hey, James, he's like, I got something to show you." And I said, "Oh, what's that, Chuck?" He goes, "Well, I can't really talk about it, but let me just tell you this. When you see it, your jaw's going to hit the floor." And I said, "Really? That good?" He goes, "That good."
I think I know this story.
Yeah.
I think you told me that. Keep going. This is a great story.
I said, and I'd known Chuck for a couple of years at this point. He's not the kind of guy to exaggerate. I mean, he's really calm, even-keeled. Like, I knew that it was going to be good. I literally dropped everything I was doing. I got in my car and I drove like 12 hours. I get there. He's got a double wide in Rachel, go into his trailer. He has a VHS tape, pops that VHS tape in, and he didn't really talk too much with me about it, other than some kids came in from LA. One was like 19, the other one was like close to 30. They were on a quintessential, extraterrestrial highway road trip, Area 51, blah, blah, blah. Get to the little alien, they're, goofing off. And he goes, "I got this tape from these guys." And that was it. He didn't really give me much more than that at the time. Pops the tape in. And there is literally the quintessential road trip going on. Like, they're goofing off in the car. They're listening to music. They're filming out the side. They're posing next to the ET sign, or like, the aliens at the Alien Inn. They're inside just goofing off, having a road trip, They're parked. It's dusk. The camera angle is like, if you can imagine the two front seats, okay? Got a guy in the front, got a guy behind the wheel, guy in the passenger seat. The car's parked. The camera is like on the armrest, I'm guessing, it had to be, on the armrest, kind of cocked a little bit. It was like turned a little bit, so it wasn't level. Okay. And it sounded to me like, you couldn't see them, but it sounded like they were trying to crawl under the fucking, excuse my French, under the car seats. I'm sorry. It sounds like they're trying to crawl under the car seats. They're just hysterical. Get down, get down.
In terror.
I promise you, they're hysterical. And all of a sudden, you see you see the dashboard, you see like all the little levers for the heating and the radio, a little bit of the steering wheel, you see the windshield a little bit, and it's like, it lights up like a Steven Spielberg movie, okay? Like, it just like this yellowy orange light that floods the inside of the cabin, okay? Now, they're hysterical, okay? It literally sounds like they're trying to crawl under the seat. It's over the top of us. It's over us now. It's over us. Get down. Get down. They're screaming. And you're looking at this light on the inside of the car. And it's like the shadows are moving around like the light source is on a pendulum and it's just rocking, right?
And they're still out like in Nevada, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, basically?
Well, I'll continue. Yeah. I mean, the car's parked. So you've never seen anything like what I'm trying to tell you. You've never seen a fluid motion of light, shadows. The way they're moving around the inside of the car, you're looking at something you've never seen before. Like, I've never seen this effect, because the light source above it is doing this like fluid motion, like really smooth and fluid, and all the shadows, and it's pretty bright, And then one kid goes, it's got to be the younger guy, I'm pretty sure it was, "I'm getting out." And the other guy's telling him, screaming not to get out. He goes, "I'm getting out." He grabs the camera, opens up the door, and you see like, it's dark, but it's not like, I see the desert and I see like a tumbleweed or something. And then all of a sudden the camera is panned up no more than the height of a telephone pole. There's this perfect flying saucer. Okay. And it's glowing like the skin is alive is the best way I can describe it. The skin, the fabric of this device, and it was perfect, was glowing, and it was rocking like a ship, not on still water, but slightly rough. And it was just floating there like this. And my brain was hearing all the eyewitness testimony that I'd interviewed for all these years, try to describe what they look like. And it was filling in the blanks for me, because I realized you're looking at something that you've never seen before. You're looking at a behavior of an object that's in the air that you have no reference points. And it's glowing in a way like phosphorus on a beach, like the skin is alive.
It seems like the best UFO video ever.
Oh my God, I saw it with my own eyes. And here's another thing. It looked like if you took like a pie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Took a pie, and you got one of those pizza knives or whatever, and you kind of cut through it symmetrically, like pieces that you're going to pull out, but you didn't pull them out. The seams of a pie, like the seams were darker. They were darker where the seams were, right? The seams were perfectly symmetrical, like a pie, all the way around it. And it just sat there wobbling. And the cameraman, and I'm just like, I'm gobsmacked. Yeah, I'm like, holy moly. This is the holy grail. Like, this is what everyone's been waiting for. And the cameraman goes, oh my God. And then the camera shuts off. And I looked over at Chuck Clark and I went, where did you get that? I just was I couldn't believe it. 100 million times better than anything I've seen since. Okay.
Yeah.
And long story short, Chuck was like, well, they're terrified. They captured something on audio. It was a high 8 tape. They let me make a copy on VHS. And that was it. And they swore up and down. I said, well, Chuck, Jesus, like you're in touch with these guys. Give him my telephone number. Tell him I'll do whatever it takes to get this footage. I should have just grabbed the bloody tape and left.
Yeah.
I'm after kicking myself to this day.
I know. I really wish you had.
I wish I had, for the greater good of humankind. And so Chuck, he's like, I'll see what I can do. And then it was just like a no. And literally for years, I kept hounding him. And he said, James, if you ask me again, I'm not going to talk to you again. And he goes, and besides, I don't even have it anymore. And I was thinking to myself, you don't have it anymore? How could you not have that anymore? Nobody throws away a piece of footage that good.
Right.
So I fast forward, I'm doing an interview with George Knapp. We're exchanging stories about the best footage we ever had, and I tell him that story. He goes, Chuck Clark had an interview. I go, yeah. He goes, that guy, I did a story on that guy. His place got raided by the feds. I went, really? He goes, oh, yeah, they raided his place, turned his place upside down. And I went, really? And he goes, really, James? And I said, well, that's it. When he said he didn't have the tape anymore, he really didn't have the tape anymore. And so, so there's kids out there that are probably, let's see, that 24 years ago?
They're not kids now. They're probably 40.
19-year-old would be 20, 40, about 45, okay? So he's got to be about 45 years old, and the last I knew, he lived in LA. I have tried and tried and tried. I have found Chuck Clark's address. He doesn't have a telephone number. I got his address somewhere from the Little Alien in Rachel, Nevada. We've written letters. He hasn't responded. That's it, man.
You have their identity. You know who they are, but you haven't been able to get them.
Who they are. No, I don't.
You don't. Well, hopefully they'll see this video on YouTube and they'll reach out to you. That would be the best.
That's the one that got away.
Yeah. That's a heck of a story. You told that to me and to Tracy and a group of friends of ours, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, maybe. Yeah, it was an amazing story. I forgot the name Chuck Clark. I'm glad that you got to talk about that. It's not related to your film, unfortunately, the phenomenon. And last question is, tell people, please, how they can watch your movie.
Okay, so you can go to www.thephenomenonfilm.com, and that has a link to all the different. Now, keep in mind, there are only a couple of platforms, and I think it's, God, you don't quote me on this, Vimeo and Amazon, or iTunes and Vimeo, and I put together 3 hours of sizzling hot extras, interviews with Story Musgrave, describing his time in space, space shuttle, Hynek stuff, the uncut raw presentation at the National Press Club, tons of stuff. So be sure your audience, when you rent it or when you buy it, to make sure that you go to a platform that offers all the bonus materials, because unfortunately there are a couple of platforms out there that don't, and I think it's iTunes and Vimeo that does. But
okay. I have a link below this to the trailer. Does the trailer link to
it? Might.
Right?
It might, yeah, and you can Google it, but just know that there are a couple of platforms, and they're very popular platforms. You'll find them with relative ease. And go to my website at thephenomenonfilm.com, and that'll have a link. It'll also have the trailer. It'll also have a synopsis. It'll also have all the cool quotes that we've been getting. It's great, and thank you for having me on, Richard.
I'm going to make sure I update the link below here so that people can go directly to that. All I have is linked to the trailer, and you are very welcome. I should be thanking you, and I think the listeners are very, very happy to hear all of this amazing information. And as amazing as this is, your film really brings it home. Again, I just want to emphasize, you really employed your gift of bringing this subject to life in a way that people really need to experience. So that's, I think, an important thing you did.
I'd like to say to everybody out there watching this and watching it in the future as well, that keep in mind that we're in this together, and anything success that I have is success that we all have. We've all worked so hard, and everyone has helped contribute to get to where we are today. It literally takes a village. So things might be great for me today. Just remember that, we're all in this together.
And what we have is not just a village, but we here have something we call the chat family. And those are all the people who have been commenting all during this interview. And I can just tell you, there are some very extraordinary people listening live right this moment. And I can tell you that they're all very, very grateful for this amazing interview by you. So again, I just want to thank you, James Fox, for your outstanding film, The Phenomenon. It just opened 2 days ago. You've climbed up to number 24 worldwide, #1 documentary. And I have a feeling you're going to be at that place and higher for a while to come, because it's it's easy to talk up new UFO documentaries because it's always good when there's a new one. But again, I just want to repeat, you've always found a way to separate yourself from the pack in very important ways. And this film of yours really succeeds. You hit a home run with it. So congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that very, very much. And it thrills me. And I'm a passenger at this point. I'm just excited to see it take off. And I pushed it out of its nest, thank God, and watch it fly. And I hope it touches people around the world. I hope it encourages further government transparency. And I hope everyone enjoys the fact that, we've got a documentary that could be presented to mainstream, and they could finally stop laughing at us, right?
Absolutely. Well, James, thank you again so much for your time. I want to thank everyone for listening. And just remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Everyone, take care. Catch you all later. Thank you again, James.
Thank you.